Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Our top story, President Trump reorganizing the chessboard against China. Where does Washington's China policy stand 100 days in? A look at trade and defense.
All we want is fairness. We just want a level playing field. We don't want to take advantage. We've been having massive deficits with China.
Lawmakers are nailing down the details on a new federal budget. A look at a boost in China-related spending. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy voiced a plan to cut down on red tape for American-made self-driving cars. Details on the plan to maintain U.S. dominance in the emerging industry. And President Trump pushing colleges and universities to disclose their foreign funding. To what extent have foreign adversaries bought up influence in U.S. higher education?
Qatar and China are probably the most prolific in pouring money into American higher ed campuses.
America First trade policy. This was President Trump's day one promise during his first 100 days back in the White House for a second term. How has President Trump and his administration dealt with rampant unfair trade practices from China? Let's take a look.
All we want is fairness. We just want a level playing field. We don't want to take advantage. We've been having massive deficits with China.
So China is exporting their policies to us. They decimated our manufacturing sector.
Tariffs is not only a tool, but a policy for the Trump administration. The goals: to deal with China's export overcapacity, rebuild U.S. domestic manufacturing capacity for critical goods, and secure key supply chain resilience.
I know it's what President Trump believes. He believes three things. One, that it is a good source of revenues. Two, it protects our important industries and the employees. And three, he's added the third leg to the stool, and he uses it for negotiating.
Washington has imposed a total 145% tariff rate on Chinese goods, including 20% for China's role in fentanyl trafficking. Beijing retaliated with 125% on U.S. goods. The world's two largest economies together make up almost half the global economy. The U.S. accounts for 28%, while China takes close to 20%.
I'm not going to say, I'm going to play hardball with China. But ultimately, they have to make a deal because otherwise they're not going to be able to deal in the United States. I think we'll make a deal with China.
Mr. President, in your meeting with...
If we don't make a deal, we'll set it. We'll just set the number and,
The Trump administration is publicly setting the stage for a deal with China, with the president saying he's already spoken to the Chinese leader. Plus, a South Korean media outlet reported that senior Chinese officials entered the U.S. Treasury building the morning of April 24th. Despite that, Beijing is insisting there are no active talks happening between China and the U.S. China claims it's open to talks, but only if the U.S. drops its 145% tariff first. On the other hand, China has told other countries not to team up with the U.S. against Beijing.
At the end of the day, that we can probably reach a deal with our allies, with the other countries that have been long-term. They've been good military allies, not perfect economic allies, and then we can approach China as a group.
Since April 2nd, what Trump called Liberation Day, when tariffs were imposed on U.S. trade partners, more than 100 countries have approached Washington wanting to negotiate. So far, Washington has emphasized non-tariff cheating during trade talks with partners, citing plans to address the issue of Chinese products being routed through the third-party countries before entering the U.S. The tactic has been widely used to skirt U.S. tariffs on Chinese goods in the past. Besides restoring fair trade with the U.S., the Trump administration is also looking to take a greater role in leading and reforming international institutions.
America First seeks to expand U.S. leadership in international institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. The IMF needs to call out countries like China that have pursued globally distorted policies and opaque currency practices for many decades.
Treasury Secretary Bessent added that treating China as a developing country is, quote, absurd. Looking back to President Trump's Day One memorandum, America First Trade Policy, reviewing China's unfair trade practices is one of Washington's top priorities.
Turning now to the Trump administration's defense strategy, what has the administration said and done so far? And where does the U.S. stand in facing the threats posed by Communist China? Let's take a closer look.
Peace through strength is the Trump administration's slogan for its defense strategy.
The U.S. is prioritizing deterring war with China in the Pacific, recognizing the reality of scarcity and making the resourcing trade-offs to ensure deterrence does not fail. Deterrence cannot fail for all of our sakes.
What's more, the Trump administration is also determined to make the U.S. military a more lethal, stronger force.
Today, there are more executive orders coming that we fully support on removing DEI inside the Pentagon, reinstating troops who were pushed out because of COVID mandates, Iron Dome for America. This is happening quickly. America is back. We are laser focused on our mission of warfighting.
As for how the administration stands on relationships with allies,
we will work with our allies and our partners to deter the Communist Chinese and their aggression in the Indo-Pacific. Full stop. By standing shoulder to shoulder with you, our allies and partners, we will put our enemies, our adversaries, those who stand against us on notice.
What's interesting to note is this administration's foreign policy on Taiwan. The island is a key U.S. ally in the Indo-Pacific. Its semiconductor manufacturing and its strategic location make it a significant player for both the U.S. economy and national security. President Trump also said this.
Is it also your policy that as long as you're president, China will never take Taiwan by force?
I never comment on that. I don't comment on anything because I don't want to ever put myself in that position.
Speaking of strategic locations, two other choke points have occupied headlines during the first 100 days of President Trump's second term: the Panama Canal and Greenland.
American ships are being severely overcharged and not treated fairly in any way, shape, or form, and that includes the United States Navy. And above all, China is operating the Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
Greenland is necessary, not for us, it's necessary for international security. You have Russian boats all over the place, you have China boats all over the place, warships, and they can't maintain it.
Trump is also seeking to divest supply chains of rare earth minerals to cut reliance on China. The critical minerals are used to make weapons.
Lawmakers are back in Washington, and Republicans are hitting the ground running on big budget changes. What will the new budget increases look like as related to China, and what federal spending is on the chopping block? NTD's Melina Weiskup reports.
Today, lawmakers are getting down into the details on a new federal budget. House Speaker Mike Johnson met with President Trump and 5 other budget leaders in Congress on Monday to talk strategy.
We're still on our schedule. I think we can meet it. As you know, we have 7 committees marking up this week, 4 the following week, and then that third week, I believe we can pass it by Memorial Day. Yes.
Border security and immigration policy are the biggest focus. Lawmakers have approved $200 billion to increase spending in these areas. Defense spending will increase by around $100 billion, with a strong focus on the Navy and shipbuilding to deter China's aggression in the Pacific Ocean and the South China Sea. Meanwhile, Republicans aim to cut at least $2 trillion from federal spending over the next decade. Committee meetings start this week, first in the House Armed Services and Education Workforce committees.
In my particular budget area, Department of Education and Labor, those issues, we're looking at some significant cuts that will, in fact, I think, help our educational policy moving forward.
Democrats protested the planned budget changes with a sit-in on the Capitol steps over the weekend. They've continued to warn against cuts to Medicaid.
They're going to hurt children, hurt families, hurt seniors, hurt people with disabilities, close hospitals, shut down nursing homes, and people will die. This is a matter of life and death.
Though Republicans have vowed not to kick off eligible Medicaid recipients and to only cut fraud and abuse from the program. Tax policy is up for change too. The GOP plans to extend Trump's 2017 tax cuts and make a new law to prevent tax collection on tips and Social Security. Once the budget markups are complete, lawmakers will vote on one final bill in both the House and the Senate. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
The Department of Transportation says American-made self-driving cars will soon have less red tape. The Transportation Secretary says the U.S. needs to keep its lead over China. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
America is in the middle of an innovation race with China, and the stakes couldn't be higher.
Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy says the Department of Transportation will ease some safety regulations for autonomous vehicle development. The move is to make sure the U.S. maintains global dominance in the industry as well as encourage domestic innovation. Secretary Duffy says that autonomous vehicles that are made overseas qualify for a quick exemption process, while vehicles made here in the U.S. must go through a stringent permit process.
This makes zero sense. We've now fixed this by expanding the AV exemption program so domestic vehicles, they're included.
According to a letter by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the program will exempt domestic AV automakers from safety regulations only for vehicles intended for research and demonstration purposes.
The long-term goal here is to move us closer to a single national standard.
Secretary Duffy also announced that the DOT has streamlined the process for autonomous vehicle makers to report crashes to the department, which makers were saying was too costly. The Autonomous Vehicle Industry Association welcomed the move, saying it's a, quote, bold and necessary step to stimulate domestic AV innovation. In January, the Biden administration banned connected and self-driving vehicles containing tech from China and Russia, citing cybersecurity concerns. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
U.S. Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy is calling to ramp up shipbuilding efforts on American soil. Speaking on Monday at the Navy Yard in Philadelphia, Duffy highlighted the wide gap between U.S. and Chinese ship production. In 2022, the U.S. built 5 ships compared to China's 1,800. The CEO of the Philadelphia shipyard said the facility is capable of ramping up production if demand increases. The CEO also noted that American-made vessels can incorporate advanced technology and create more American jobs. Zooming in on one of President Trump's executive orders, the directive requires colleges and universities to disclose their foreign funding. What's the true scope when it comes to foreign adversaries buying influence on U.S. campuses? NTD's Jack Bradley tapped Michael Luchi for insight. He's the founder and chief executive officer of State Armor.
Michael Luchi, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Jack, it's wonderful to be on.
President Trump is now requiring colleges to be more transparent about foreign funding or risk their federal aid. What problem is he trying to solve here, and describe the scope of the significance of this?
What President Trump is trying to get at is that foreign adversaries in particular are buying influence on our campuses. They do that through donations, gifts, contracts, student arrangements, research partnerships, and on down the list. I'll give you 2, for example. Qatar and China are probably the most prolific in pouring money into American higher ed campuses, influential campuses, state campuses, all across the board. And it's often associated with programming that's really anti-American in many ways. On the Chinese side, it's also often associated with intellectual property theft and the sharing of research that we really shouldn't be sharing with him. So that's what President Trump's getting at. This is an incredible first move. Universities need to be transparent about their foreign funding. And I think that we'll need to see some steps furthermore to cut off funding from the wrong parts of the world.
What sort of national security implications does this have?
Well, I'll give you one example. We saw research from the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party last summer, where they detailed 6 specific research partnerships that are likely allowing the Chinese Communist Party to steal technology that could be used for military purposes. It's not just 6. This is China's ubiquitous approach to research partnerships in the United States. You have universities in the United States that are partnered with some very bad actors on the Chinese side, And minimally the federal government, but also state governments need to be read in on that so they could bring some really strategic approach to make sure we're not giving away the crown jewels of American innovation, technology, and national defense.
Now, speaking of the state level action, your organization, State Armor Action, tracks the progress of legislation in various states to counter threats from foreign adversaries like the CCP. I want to ask you, what are some of the most significant laws already in place or bills on the table right now?
What we're seeing, and this sounds like an arcane topic, but what we're seeing in a lot of states is legislation to protect DNA, genomic data from Chinese military companies. And this is incredibly important, and it's really amazing that states are solving this problem. What's happening, and the Chinese side talks about this, is they want to use American genomic data to create genetically targeted bioweapons. They talk about this in their military literature. It's completely nightmarish. You have a bunch of states like Texas, like Florida, Tennessee, Montana, Kansas, Nebraska, all over the map that are cutting this off completely. They're saying you can't access our genomic data, nor can your companies really operate in our state. You also see states selling their pensions out of China as quickly as possible. Get that money back into friendly and allied countries. And I'll go one step further. States are getting ready in case China creates a conflict. They're building resilience strategies, cyber command in the state of Texas, so that when China attacks us, we'll be ready to protect ourselves.
And you mentioned the bioweapon. Just for our audience, can you give us some examples of what that could look like?
I'll give you a paraphrase of the Chinese general who ran their National Defense University when he published a book on this topic. He said the best weapons target ethnicities so that you could leave the enemy ethnicities incapacitated, sterilized, or even dead while your own side is unaffected by that. So what exactly does that look like? I'm sure that that is a highly classified topic on our side, and I'm not the person who has access to that. But they are openly talking about, in 2017, they published a book where they openly talked about creating weapons that kill people of the enemy ethnicities and leave their people alone. When they talk about things like that, we need to take it seriously. They're saying what they're trying to do. We need to cut them off from genomic data. And the companies involved in this in the Chinese side are involved in human rights abuses. They're sanctioned by our Department of Commerce. They're blacklisted by our Department of Defense. They shouldn't be here anyways. So it's a very strong and sensible precaution for states to cut these companies out of their supply chains.
Can you break this down a bit for us and the types of things that states can do for each of these categories?
On supply chains and critical infrastructure, what states should be asking themselves is, if China starts a hot conflict in the Pacific, what will happen here? What supply chains will fall apart? We have a great example of this. During the coronavirus, which again was clearly China's fault, all the supply chains that depended on China fell apart completely. Americans were bereft of the materials, the drugs, and the equipment they needed to fight the pandemic because China hoarded all of it. This was actually subject to a very famous lawsuit in the state of Missouri for China doing that. So that's the supply chain breakdown. Our federal leaders are telling us that China has inserted themselves in all of our critical infrastructure, our communications, our water systems, our airports, and they are preparing for the day, to quote President Biden's leader on this, to create an everything, everywhere, all at once chaos within the United States. They would do that here if they start a fight over there. And finally, on political warfare and influence operations, they are targeting people across the United States who dissent. And I'm happy to tell you right here today that the state of Texas Senate unanimously passed the first state legislation to crush what's called transnational repression. What Texas is saying is that if you target our people here, many of whom are Chinese dissidents, most of whom are Chinese dissidents, we're going to punish you so hard that you'll never consider doing that again. Transnational repression is the political warfare we have to stop. The espionage, all the broad spectrum of warfare that China conducts here in the United States, states are stepping up to block all of that.
Michael Luchi, founder and CEO of State Armor, thank you so much for your insights here today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, the U.S. government looking to extradite 2 foreign nationals in Serbia. They're accused of targeting a Los Angeles artist who spoke out against Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping using threats, harassment, and intimidation. All of that on behalf of the Chinese regime. Japan and the Philippines are in talks to expand defense cooperation. A look at how aggression from Communist China has brought them closer.
We have agreed to start negotiations on an acquisition and cross-servicing agreement.
Welcome back to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. The U.S. government is seeking the extradition of 2 foreign nationals from Serbia. They allegedly hired people to harass, intimidate, and threaten a Los Angeles artist who had publicly criticized Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping. The 2 suspects were arrested in Serbia on April 24th. The Justice Department of the United States announced their identities: Cui Guanghai, a Chinese national, and John Miller from the UK. The 2 were allegedly working for the Chinese regime. Their goal was to prevent a Los Angeles artist from traveling to San Francisco. The artist had planned to protest against Chinese leader Xi Jinping's visit to the city during the 2023 APEC summit. To do it, the 2 suspected agents, Choi and Miller, hired 2 more individuals to help. They tasked the recruits to surveil the artist, install a tracking device on his car, slash the car's tires, and destroy a piece of his art, a statue depicting Xi and his wife kneeling with their hands tied behind their backs. What Choi and Miller didn't know was that the individuals they hired were actually undercover agents and informants for the FBI. If convicted, Choi and Miller face up to 5 years in prison for conspiracy and another 5 years for interstate stalking. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Central District of California said it's now seeking their extradition, so they may face charges here in the U.S. Next, 2 U.S. allies are vowing to boost their defense alliance in the face of aggression from Communist China. Tuesday, the president of the Philippines met with Japan's prime minister for talks on expanding their maritime partnership.
Japan has been of great assistance in helping us achieve our aspiration for peace and friendship with all nations with strength and with integrity. Further, we have agreed to start negotiations on an acquisition and cross-servicing agreement.
Details on the potential deal haven't been shared yet. It's worth noting both countries have maritime disputes with Beijing. Their civilian fishing boats also face frequent harassment from China's Coast Guard. That's because Beijing claims areas of the South China Sea that overlap with its neighbor's territory. And international court ruled China's territory claims they're invalid in 2016. The U.S. has also condemned Beijing for its aggression in the region. That's all for today's China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. If you have any feedback on the show or have something you'd like to see us cover, send us an email at chinainfocus@ntd.com. We'd love to hear from you. For round-the-clock original news coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow.